I'm going to bring in Matthew Holmes. He's the Executive Vice President of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. Matthew, the work the Chamber has done has been very helpful in looking at which cities and which areas are the most trade exposed in this trade war and the most vulnerable. What are your thoughts on what happened today and how that all affects the economic outlook here in the country?
Well, I think we have to take this and pause and watch what happens next. As we've been living through, this changes day by day. And I think the rest of the world is waking up to the nightmare that Canada's been living. And the American dream is going to lead to a lot of sleepless nights around the world. I think tactically, Canada probably benefits from just standing in the tall grass for a bit longer and watching this one play out. I think we can't forget steel and aluminum, our auto sector, our agri-food sector that's being faced with tariffs from China as well. And I think that's an important part here. What, you know, the rock that Trump is throwing right now is hitting that pond, and it's going to have a ripple effect around the world, and Canada's going to be living with that as well. So it's not just our trade with the U.S. that's impacted here, it will be a global effect. And what the markets do tomorrow and what we see in the days to come could be quite damaging.
Well, that's a very important point to remember, right? Because, you know, this is not just a bilateral trade disruption. This is a fundamental, you know, reshaping he's trying of global trade. I mean, 34% tariffs on China on top of what's already there. 20% of the European Union. You know, you just look at it, right? 24% in Japan, 26% on India. All the big 10 economies on Earth being hit by the biggest economy on Earth. So, I mean, what sort of waves do we get from the ripples he's causing there in global trade? I mean, what is the risk to Canada, even with despair, of direct action? How vulnerable are we to that?
Well, we're a trading nation. We're an importer, we're an exporter, and we're one of the world's top in both of those categories. So what happens to the global economy happens to Canada and Canadian business. Obviously, we're over-indexed with the U.S., and it's an important trade relationship for us. And as we look to the diversification of our markets in response to this threat that we've been facing, you know, the health and the integrity of those other markets and our ability to trade with them will also be important. So it's a long-term impact, and I think this is a very disruptive moment for the global economy. It's one that will impact Canada. It's going to lead to compromised markets around the world. Job losses, recession is basically guaranteed in this current situation for Canada, likely for the U.S. And I think
even with us being spared today, just the global disruption could lead to a recession?
I think that's still in the cards for this year. We have to watch that closely. And the other factor here that I think is missing is what is this going to do to the price of goods in America? You know, this president was elected on affordability, on housing. All of those are going to be incredibly damaged, if not permanently, from this move. And so the time it takes for that to ripple through to the economy, whether that's the stock market or just the grocery stores, that will be, I think, a key decision maker. And you mentioned our research earlier from the Business Data Lab at the Canadian Chamber. That's been our effort to make this a subnational conversation for Canada. So what are the governors feeling and what are they saying? What are mayors in U.S. cities thinking about their critical employers, the jobs at stake, the supply chains that they rely on? We want that conversation. We don't want this big, GDP conversation. We want it to be real and local because that's what's going to turn the midterms.
Yeah, is it Bobby Kennedy once said GDP is a measurement of everything except that which makes life worthwhile. And it's hard to, you know, look at a macro GDP contraction and relate that down, but this is already hundreds, if not thousands, of people in the steel industry. The auto sector is going to face, like, these are good paying jobs, you know, in towns and cities that this is the core of the economy there, right?
Absolutely.
And this is what we're talking about. So, you know, when you look at this, this chart he held up,
beautiful prop,
which is a great way to tell the world the economy is flipping upside down. The incentive for diversification and under-indexing maybe on the United States, this seems like a moment that accelerates those impulses. I know it's going to take a while for companies to change their supply chains, but this could be, I don't want to say a positive thing, but there's potentially, in every disruption, there's an opportunity.
Absolutely, and we have to take that. And there are things, I mean, the reality is the Canadian business feels a tariff on day one. That impact is immediate, and it's quite notable. The time it takes to make our economy more competitive, more resilient, the trade infrastructure we need to get to Tidewater, to have the rails and roads and ports that we need for our trade diversification, and just to connect internally for internal trade across the country, that takes time and investment. And then moving to other countries, moving to other cultures, other languages, developing those business relationships where, you know, there's always going to be a significant amount of trade with the U.S. There's trade adjacency there.
Yeah.
Of course, we're going to trade with them. We have a common language for the most part. We have a lot of shared history. We have a shared border. We have infrastructure that connects us integrally. But the investment and the win from moving to other markets is all win, and we should take that. And I look at this when I speak to our members, I talk about it like an insurance policy. Of course, you're going to have your number one, client or customer. But what's your number two? What's your number three? And are you taking care of those?
Yeah, and look, and the Bobby Kennedy I quoted was senior, not junior. He says very different things. But in this moment, internal trade is obviously going to get a greater level of urgency in this. The numbers we've seen, the optimism on internal trade that could add like $200 billion to the country's GDP, does that apply in a Canadian economy that is completely sideswiped by the actions of the U.S.? Do you know what I mean? Like, do those numbers hold if things are so completely disrupted? Because it can help, but it doesn't seem like it's not going to replace the U.S. How does internal trade help and its value affected in a moment like this?
Well, there's a couple of ways of looking at this. One is, if not now, then when? I mean, this is our moment.
Sure.
We need to be bold. We need to take action on this thing. We can't continue to be 13 different economies standing side by side and not playing together in the sandbox. We have to be one economy. That suddenly makes us a real G7 nation when we become that economy. We're suddenly an economy worth investing in, because you're not going to be facing all of these different levels of regulatory barriers and different systems and standards and whether you can work in this province or that province. And so that actually makes us more competitive on the world stage when we deal with the internal trade barriers as well. But yes, the 200 billion, the 4% GDP, those numbers that you see, those are long-term numbers. That's an investment in our future that we have to make. But it's not going to be overnight. No, it's not going to replace trade with the United States right away. But it's something we should do.
Okay, just one last question. Maybe it's too soon to have this math done, but sort of the broad-based global tariff scenario that your group did, I think it forecasted about 1.3, 1.7% economic contraction over the second quarter if these go on for about 3 months, 150, 160,000 job losses. With what happened today, I mean, are we talking a half of that, a third of that? Like, where do you see it fitting in the modeling, or do you just need to start that work from scratch?
Well, we did two studies. We did first a 10% and then a 25%. So with the 25%, we saw 2.6% GDP contraction in Canada and 1.6% contraction in the United States in a retaliatory environment such as what we will see in response to today. And so I think we still have to watch that closely, because it's not just the trade and what Canada is facing, it's how the entire trade environment is complicated. And just the administrative burden, the complexity, the confusion. Uncertainty is bad for business. And what we saw today, even though there was a beautiful chart, is a whole lot of uncertainty.
This makes it worse. The
worse.
implications of that chart are pretty profound on a global scale.
Yeah, and when you have an administration that is actively diminishing its own workforce, quite actively, you have to ask the question, is who's going to administer this? How are they going to do the math?
Yeah, Doge can only do so much, it seems. All right, Matthew Holmes, Executive Vice President of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. We appreciate your time. Thanks for being here today, sir.
Thanks for having me.